Well, very good. Let's go ahead and get started here. Again, I think people will go ahead and trickle in here. So once again, we've got a full agenda for the Sprint 24 demo. We're going to cover really four major themes here. And so starting off with Salmia. Salmia's done some great work on the account recovery experience. And so we're going to talk through some work that she's prototyped, gotten some feedback there, as well as an inventory that she has done, and starting to take a look at closely between Venya and the UI components. So we'll start off with that. Then we'll hand off to Mr. Kalkoman, and he's going to show us some of the updates around documentation based on user research that Salmia and others led. And so we're continuing to improve that. It's a big part of our experience, and so we'll get some updates to share there. Then we're going to switch gears to some of the code and architecture related items. And so Jimmy's going to show us some of his work on testing around checkout MVP. So there's some testing there, as well as a work in progress take at navigation. And so we're starting to stitch together some of the key experiences of the MVP. Navigation is no different for that. And so anxious to see that from Jimmy. And then last but not least, of course, is what James is referring to, which is the beginnings of this middle tier architecture, and what's that forming in terms of the test harness and some of the reference implementation pieces. And so lots to cover in an hour, but again, thank you so much for joining us. And without further ado, I'd love to hand it off here to Salmia to get us started.
All right, let's see. I will replace your screen share. Okay, good. Chrome. Okay, so circling back from feedback last time, just to set context for everyone, we decided that we were only going to do sign in from the footer because it couldn't contextually be updated between create account and sign in. So when they click that, they kind of get to the screen, which gives them the option to sign in if they have an existing account, or to create an account if they don't have one. So on the forgot your username and password, this is the flow that I currently have, and I still have open questions that I need help answering, and I'll get to that at the end of the flow. So the shopper says, I forgot my username or password. This particularly deals with the password flow. So they're asked to enter an email to receive a password reset link, and they enter their email address, hit submit. Whoops, that was weird. Okay, anyway, they hit submit and they get a thing that says if you have an account associated with it, you'll receive a link. I don't have the email screen, but presumably they would go into their email, they would click the link, they would land here, and then they would set a new password. Now on this, I have a number of questions. Actually, backtracking, there needs to be somewhere that we have the captcha. I don't know where exactly we should. It's probably in the set new password screen, I would presume, and what that looks like. I need some help figuring out visually what we would like that to look like. The other thing is that, or the main thing is, let's say that the shopper is on Chrome and they're browsing Venya and they go through this password reset flow. It may just open by default in Safari on iOS or in a separate tab, in which case they'll be going through the process in a different context than they were browsing. And so when they do reset the password and we prompt them to log in again, we kind of need to decide where do we land them.
Right.
Also, it's kind of hard to predict at what time of the shopper flow they actually initiated this sign in or forgot password sequence. And so if they did have items in their cart and this was opening in a new browser, there would be no way to remember that and go back to the old browser where they were looking at the site and then update it as a logged in view. And there would be no way, as I understand, to carry over what was in their cart into a different browser. So I have comments here, just need help kind of talking through those and figuring out what we want to do. I don't think there's any way to indicate to them that or why, or to detect if they had items in their cart if it was a new browser. So just there's a UX sort of disconnect here that I don't know if we can address, but I would like to try.
Yeah. No, I think this is really, really great, Samia. So I think it's a good start. I think we're going to mark this one as partial. I think we've got a story in its own right around CAPTCHA, and then definitely want to sync up with James on how this touches things like state management around the cart, how that works with Redux and everything of that nature. And so I think It's a good. I think it's a good progress on that. But let's split this based on some of the work that we found this. But I think yeah, I think it's a really good progress.
Okay, awesome.
And for what it's worth, I don't see any significant departure just from that screen wide modal. It does not imply that there's going to have to be a radical change to any infrastructure.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah, just need to set aside some time so I can talk through all the use case concerns that I listed.
Gotcha.
Cool. So if there are no other questions on that flow, I'll carry on with the next one.
Please.
Which most of you have already seen at grooming last week. It's the edit cart flow. So the way that we're dealing with this is that there are two contexts here. One is where a shopper could want to add the same item in a different configuration intentionally, and where they want to edit the item they have in their cart already. The decision right now has been to say if they click the product thumbnail or the product title, they would be taken to the PD page,
right,
where they would configure and add a new item to their cart, and this would be a duplicate in a different configuration. However, if they hit the three dots, it gives them the option to edit the item. And when they say edit item, it kind of keeps them in the context of the mini cart and allows them to make changes to that item. And so then they're able to save changes, and then they're popped back into the shopping cart with an indicator that the cart item has been updated. So they have feedback on the action that they just performed. So these are the two parts that we have. I'm meeting with Misha today also to kind of walk him through this and make sure. He said he has some other contexts in which something similar might be needed from a workflow standpoint. So I'll know more this afternoon, but I'll share what I have with him.
Perfect.
Any questions on that? Okay. Moving on to the last piece is Eric and I have just put together a spreadsheet of the various components that we've been tracking. And it has two statuses, as you can see. One is design and the other is development. Jimmy will be asked to weigh in on development. Now, the design portion of it, I've gone in and tracked to say which ones. So a bunch of these had been done previously, so some of them just need to be reviewed, and I need to know what changes to make or what use cases to account for going forward. As you can see, a few of them are ready for development, and some of them are blocked either because we've decided we're not going to do that right now, or we don't have enough information to hazard, design at this point. And then there are some that we haven't. Oh, actually, this should be updated.
It's a living document.
It's a living document.
Yeah, and just to set context of this, and for people taking a look at this, we'd love to use this almost as a status, right? And so there's some great open source projects out there, like the VMware Clarity project, where you essentially have a series of components that show its various status. And so again, just opening more visibility on what's there. We've done a nice job at leading by experience in some of these, some of the pages and flows within it. But ultimately, there's a series of reusable components that need to be done too. So no, I think it's a really good start. But kind of as a preview of what's to come, there will likely be a doc story coming out of this too, to kind of show some of the status around that, including the things that are completed, things that are in progress, and things that need to be done for that one. So that's the intended outcome.
Yeah, it's just a quick snapshot of what's going on.
Yep.
With Venia.
Yep.
From a component standpoint. That's all I had.
Great. Perfect. Thank you, Sonia.
Sure thing. And if anybody has questions that come up later, I'm on Slack. You can reach me at any time, or via email.
Excellent.
Or some of you know where I sit.
Very good. All right, let's switch gears then to Mr. Kalkoven from a doc standpoint. Lots of good progress this sprint.
Thanks. Yeah, let me share my screen. You guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So a little bit of context. In the last sprint, me and Samya sat down with some developers, and we observed them while they used our documentation site. We made notes on how they use it, what kind of roadblocks were found, and we created some issues to try to alleviate some of that.
Yep.
So a few improvements on the home page. We updated the bar up here to reflect that this is no longer pre-release documentation. This is the actual documentation, but it does reflect the progress of the PWA project and that it's not complete yet. It's it's moving target. And we added links to the PWA Slack channel here and also in the footer. We also updated the label for the UI components. Some developers were confused on what Peregrine was. It wasn't very common, so I changed it from Learn Peregrine to Learn UI components. I updated the labels on the links to the GitHub repositories because before it was just at build pack, Peregrine, Venya, and people expected it to go to the documentation page instead of the source of that. So those are the improvements for the front page. The second set of improvements were in the setup. We asked developers, how they would go about finding out how to set up Venya, and so when they went through this page, there was some feedback that we got from them. Mostly on before the title was set up, and it confused people. They expected it to be how to set up Magento, so I clarified that by relabeling it to Venya theme setup. I also improved the prerequisites, expanded on a link to the setup guide for Magento, and we also noted that these two setup environments are known to work with these steps, the Valet Plus and the Vagrant Box. I've also prefixed each section with steps to kind of help with the flow of the tutorial. And that's it for that. And lastly, I wanted to call out one of our community members, Jonathan Stein, for contributing this GraphQL topic. So thank you for that. It's awesome. And that's pretty much my updates for this past sprint.
And just to add, this was conducted as a pretty typical sort of qualitative session usability test where we gave the developers tasks on, how would you do this, how would you do that, and just kind of saw where they went for information. And it's become a little bit clearer that not all of them come to documentation to learn. A lot of them tend to use GitHub and then look to documentation as a place of resolution or troubleshooting. So I'll keep working with James here to kind of regularly test what we're writing for them to consume and seeing how we can make this better and better over time. Thanks, James. It looks great.
It does. Yeah, this is really going to help us with enablement, whether it be contribution days or just getting people up and going so they understand the project. So awesome work. Yeah. Thank you.
Yay.
All right, so let's go ahead and switch gears. Then we've got some updates from Jimmy and James. Jimmy, you on the line?
I don't know.
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, hey, Jimmy.
Sorry, it's just 8 in the morning, so I'm here like at 50% capacity.
That's fair enough. So yeah, we had some updates on the navigation, and then I know you did some great work on test as well. So.
Yep. Share the screen now. There we go. You guys see my screen?
We can.
Cool. So I already demoed the testing last time we did the demo. So I'm not going to go through that today, but we added more to it. So there's more of that. So the big thing that I worked on was navigation. Samya has been designing it. So this is the very latest look at what it's supposed to look like. Just basically we have the ability to dive into categories, to go back, to close out of the drawer. There's each of the categories, and then there's the link to the existing category. And then we'd come up with this idea for a breadcrumb. So you're not going to see the breadcrumb, but you are going to see the other things here. Let's go take a look at what that's going to be like. So that's loaded. Okay, so when you open up the nav, you should see all of the categories, and you should be able to dive into these categories and have them replace, and then navigate to a category. So if you come over here, switch to a different category, navigate there. So this uncovers something interesting about the way that we've designed the site for certain reasons, which is that every time you make one of those route changes, it actually re-downloads or it actually re-renders the entire app from the ground up, and that is so that you could maximize extensibility. But that's actually not ideal because we really want to preserve our navigation state across navigations, or at least be able to. And something that's interesting about this behavior is if I go now to one of the categories that I've already visited, like jackets here under women, it does preserve my state. It doesn't re-render the whole time. So it's only, currently it's only the first time you go to a new category that it re-renders the whole thing. And this is due to a kind of a fundamental choice that we made early on about how components are matched to routes. So that's going to be something that we'll look into this sprint, hopefully. And that's going to align with some other work we've talked about in the PWA Slack channel. But at any rate, these are the way that the categories can be accessed through the navigation. Currently, this is running off of mock data, which we can see here, which is constructed to basically emulate what you would get if you fetched the root category, which for me is default category, and with an infinite depth. So every time you get this children data array on a single category, if this has infinite depth, then you'll get a fully nested list of all the categories. We currently don't have a categories endpoint in GraphQL. We only have individual categories, and they don't have children, so we can't construct this particular query from GraphQL yet. There is a REST endpoint for it, but the REST endpoint requires auth, and I would love to know why that is, maybe security reasons. But in any case, basically I can't make this query right now. But as soon as we do, we can drop that in and shouldn't have too much change when that comes in. So give a quick overview of what this looks like, what has gone into this PR. There's a new set of catalog actions and a reducer to go along with it. And so that's basically going to be where we fetch the categories and then dispatch that we've received them. And basically when we receive the root category here, we will normalize those by diving into the children data and constructing a flat list, just sort of a mirror of what the API has. And then we'll render the new navigation component. So we've got a container here connected to Redux and the new root component, which is basically going to fetch those categories the first time it renders. And from there, we'll be constructing this category tree, which is basically consists of branches and leaves. Branches that help you dive further, and leaves that help you by linking to the actual category. And that's pretty much it.
Great. Yeah, nice work, Jimmy. Yeah, I think this gets us some really good progress on the experience itself, and as part of our work, just exposes some of the questions we have around the interfaces themselves. And so I'll probably split this. Potentially we can work with maybe even Dennis and Zara or others to get some help on that API and just understanding why. There's probably someone who knows. There's probably a good reason for that. If there's not, we can work with them on their backlog as well, because it certainly seems reasonable to do so. But there's probably a good reason. So nice work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.
And James, you want to go?
Hey, James, you might be on mute. So we get an update from you on the middle tier architecture.
Whoops, sorry, I was on mute. Indeed, I will share my screen. I actually can share my face. It's just no great shakes today. Hello. But I'm going to turn off the video because my internet connection here is pretty poor. Okay, sharing my screen now. I think the first thing that I ought to show you is you can see that there's a development server running, right? There's a lot of text. But here we go. A couple of things I'd like you to notice. First of all, that was fast as hell, even in development mode. Another thing to notice is that it didn't actually run the GraphQL call that it normally runs in order to get the URL resolver. If we visit the accessories page, or the tops page, oh, we got a data fetch error. Oh no! And of course the demo is busted. But let's see. That was just a moment while I see what that seems to be busted. Variable ID got an unexpected value, ID 7. Oh, I see. Okay, so we've got like a string casting issue. That's actually something that's fairly new. But okay, I will, I suppose, go back to, say, the Carmina earrings. That works a lot better because there isn't any integer casting. So you notice that, first of all, it doesn't do the GraphQL URL resolver request. And second of all, it loads super fast. Maybe a third thing to recognize is that the critical CSS has already been inlined, which means that the loading screen immediately shows up styled without a font problem. And as soon as we have a strategy for this, the header will show up as well. Another thing to see is that the reason that it hasn't made that GraphQL request is that we were able to embed some server-side logic. Not a lot of it, but there's the initial request that was in series and holding up the initial time to first interaction. We have elided that by providing a server-side, a little bit of server-side rendering. Now let's talk about the server-side rendering a little bit. In the past, Magento themes have been the sort of round hole into which the square peg of PWAs have been fitting. And that's something that we intended. We wanted to make it as close to regular Magento practice as possible. I have an environment file, which you might be familiar with, which specifies that I have a backend domain here that is Magento 2p3 venia.test. Okay, long shot, but does anybody on this phone call have some sort of publicly available Magento site with Venia data in it? Just asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to give it to me?
Yeah, 1 second. I'll need to get it up. I was expecting just to be an observer in this. So.
Well, you didn't have to speak up. I didn't force this on you, man. I didn't force this on you. Now, you might observe that I have an admin username and password now in my environment file. That's temporary, but in order to do the REST API work that was pulling together the site title, the site-wide variables and stuff, that was the way that I was doing auth, because our OAuth scheme is mysterious. And there's folks on the cloud onboarding team who are the perfect people to consult. Okay, thank you, Rowan. So I'm going to copy this. We got playground.mirwood.org, and there's the CMS page stub because it's not up to date. But what if maybe I just were to put that in here? Well, my theme's not installed. And historically, that meant that it wouldn't work. But what if actually it did? Okay. Well, now that is because there is not an appropriate backend domain. Let's see, wait a minute. Things are still a little bit buggy. But I'm going to show you kind of why it at least tried to contact Rowan's site. I'm curious as to why that matcher is coming up undefined. Maybe it's because we've got the Magento backend domain, GraphQL. That's got to work, right? And then, well, curious. Perhaps it's gone off the rails. Now, web critical CSS, that could be it. So I'm going to switch it back to mine, but the other way that I can show you that things have changed a bit is by going to the actual underlying Magento site that I have and observing that Luma is the active theme, because the PWA that I'm running is no longer a theme. It is a completely separate application that is running on a middle tier powered by Upward.js. The small change to Webpack that I made is fairly digestible. So the people who are already accustomed to this Webpack file are going to see this abstracted away into an Upward plugin, which they simply have to attach. And that Upward plugin takes an address of this Upward file. And the Upward file is something that I've talked about in the specification. And this is a YAML file which in a completely declarative manner describes the behavior of that server. And that behavior so far has not been impressive because it is super buggy. But here's what it tries to do. This is supposed to be fairly readable. It's supposed to assemble a response that's status, headers, and body. And that means that it's going to depend on these context values. So it looks for page. Page is a conditional, which matches on the request URL, looks for our SEO HTML names, and then goes to the GraphQL router. The GraphQL router is looking at the type of the resolved URL, which means that it looks up the resolved URL resolver result, which means that it runs a query to the Magento GraphQL backend domain, and and then runs the query at URL resolver GraphQL, which it pulls out of this file, and then argues the request URL path name to it as a variable. And then we've got a few other top level settings just to sort of dry up the configuration code, but essentially the GraphQL router says, if we matched on any type, then use the found configuration. If not, use the not found configuration. And sure enough, we've got found as 200 and not found as 400 because it should be 404, but I don't know. The actual application shell is being driven by appshell.mst, and we provide the URL resolver and critical CSS variables to it. So if we look at appshell.mst, it's a simple plain mustache template that accepts critical CSS inside a style tag, and those 3 mustaches mean it's unescaped, and it assembles JSON from the URL resolver value that's put in there. And result is you get this. And this is dynamically generated. The critical CSS is done very simply by setting up a naming convention where all of the things that should be inlined are .critical.css instead of just .css. And so it's up to your discretion, and that's why I took things like main, header, and footer in the cart trigger and made them critical. The critical CSS does get inlined and stuffed in there, but it happens to be in such a way that the class names are consistent throughout. So the built JavaScript libraries that actually incorporate these weird class names mirror exactly the generated class names that come into the app shell. Upward.js is available now for consumption. It is the reference implementation of the Upward protocol, which is detailed in exhaustive detail over here, whose essential function, again, is to provide a cross-platform behavioral specification. I can see very little obstacle to a PHP developer writing something that interprets this document and then replicates the same behavior as the Node.js server, maybe with fewer bugs. But the Node.js server is available now. And in my integration branch, I have configured this Node.js server so that the middleware is part of the chain of the PWA dev server. So apart from a couple of pass-throughs just to the media and the GraphQL and the REST endpoints, the proxy no longer goes back to Magento for every request. Instead, it uses the upward middleware and receives the upward path, and thereby Venia describes its own server-side behavior at the top level. That is the future of it. That is going to progress into the repository in a number of stages, but this is what I have been up nights working on, and I think that it serves as the bridge for the gap that exists between our production and development environments right now. Crucially, it is extensible and could be used in a Node.js configuration in maybe a Dockerized or Kubernetes-ized configuration so that you still have Node.js, and then you could potentially do server-side React rendering, for instance. The specification is very clear, actually, that React is something you could easily support just by adding the feature to your own particular renderer. It's not within specification, but you can make a superset of the spec if you want to. So the React DOM server is like 4 lines within this structure. So this opens up the door to stable and simple API for the PWAs that are deployed on top of Magento with the extensibility that comes with a tree structure. And thus ends my demo.
Nice work, Søren. Yeah, that's yeah, wow. That's really, really good.
It's kind of hard to tell, I think, the big difference, but again, just the way that the assets are coming down is a lot cleaner. And there's still a lot of optimization work to be done, but especially in the area of root components and stuff. Now we can do preloads. Potentially we could preload the JSON.
Yeah, this is going to be massive. You have to iron it out, and it's going to be awesome.
We'll iron it out, but it's going to be great. And I actually particularly like how the critical CSS thing works, which is not entirely part and parcel of this, but I needed to demo something that it made possible. So yeah,
Cool.
Mustache is the supported template engine, and GraphQL is the supported service resolver. And ultimately, I think we're going to add a resolution strategy that can do REST calls and then turn them on the fly into a virtual GraphQL schema. And this achieves the ultimate goal of the rationale document that unifies the graph. So we do want GraphQL to be the only thing that the progressive web app has to speak, and presently that's not the case. But this is the beginning of that, because ultimately a resolver could be designed or made so that it, again, creates like a virtual schema. You place a call, the YAML file specifies that the GraphQL resolver will respond to this, and that root value, because it can parse GraphQL on the server side. It understands it, so it can read the query out. And then it can pass along values that are not supported in the actual Magento schema to REST's endpoint, and then synthesize the type as it comes back. So, that's something that the Apollo engine and server do. It's a proven technique in production, and this just sort of is a way of making it declarative so that it can be done anywhere. Any other questions?
I was just going to say, yeah, exciting to see the start of the server-side rendering stuff getting in there and the critical CSS. Yeah. Could you just do a quick review of the round trip of, let's say we wanted to add in some of the metadata tags into the page. What are each of the stages that we'd be hitting there to make that possible?
Right. So first of all, right now, our root components perform their own queries, and those queries need to be more reusable. So right now we have a root component called product that performs a query that is actually inline. Now, Babel and Webpack do compile this so it's more efficient, but we could pretty easily refactor it so that it's not this way. We could zip it out and go down to this trusty queries folder I made. Just put it in there instead. So now you have a query that can be reused in multiple contexts. In the product, we would just pull it in this way. And we trust that's the Babel transformer is going to take care of that and turn it into a query as it comes in. And then we do that. And so now that that thing is a separate and available thing, we would just go into our upward YAML file and say that we need to update that strategy. So we have just matching the path name here, and then the next step down is that this router currently just has one match clause against the URL resolver type. So these things are serial, and they don't fall through. So we could change this to product and use product found. What is product found? I'm about to describe it down here, I guess. Product found is an inline resolver that produces a status of 200 because we found the product, and there's no, I'm still not used to YAML, and headers of the usual HTML document headers, which I stored, and then the body would be a product shell, and the product shell is just like the shell, but it uses, I don't know, the product results. What's the product result? Well, it is the zeroth result set, because as you may or may not know, our products query does not return scalars. You just filter it until it's just an array of one product. So you can only get products. You got to lift that thing out. Although you could just as easily do that in the template. So we'll just sort of demonstrate that. What is product results? Is another service query. So just like up here, we have the URL resolver result is querying against Magento GQL, which is defined there, and uses that query and those variables. This one is similar, except that it uses the get product detail query. And why are you complaining at me? It's a bad indentation. It seems like you should shut up. Okay, and then the variables, instead of, well, let's look at the product detail GraphQL query and see what it demands. It demands a URL key, so I think we're on the right track already. I think we're going to be good. Now, this probably gives us enough, but a cool thing that you could do is add maybe an argument to this that does only the server side, much like the Act SSR. So you do like on server, and sorry, I guess I'll just shrink it because Rowan's face is in the way. And then, you know, if you don't want to get this huge amount of metadata, you know, like preload links, I don't know actually what the schema has now that I think about it. So it's going to be products and the product interface. There is meta title, meta keyword, meta description. So let's say you don't actually meta keyword, meta description. Well, you don't want to pull those down at runtime because you don't need them. So actually, it's in the include directive. It's not good. Okay, so now we've got those things that only come down when we're on the server. So we understand that we need to do on server is true. And because there's that typing issue, I'll just call that a string and instead of, whoops. Okay, so now we've got this query that gets reused in two places. It's used on the front end and it's used on the back. And the URL key is still the request URL path name, and it produces a product result that has this shape. So we know that if we're doing the product shell, it needs the product, and the product is going to have SKU, name, price, description, media gallery entries, and meta. So the app shell, maybe what we want to do is turn the app shell into, I don't know, something that takes partials. We got this app shell.mst, and maybe we could turn it into something else. But for now, I'm just going to copy paste it. But of course, we can use partials for all of this. So this could easily be replaced with like, whoops. What happened? I have too many clipboards. So now it looks like what we really want is a little bit more product detail information. Now, again, once we have replicated the header or decided how we do that, we could. But why don't we just maybe preload it? Oh, no, you know what? Now I just remembered what you were really thinking about, Rowan, which was meta name equals title. And this obviously could be reused. Whoops, I forget how basic HTML works now because that's where I'm at in life. And have I got that right? Did I mess up the spec on that? It's meta keyword for some reason. All right. And description, meta description. Okay, let's see how much of that error coding was effective. And I'm sure there'll be bugs, but you see, that's kind of the process that we would go through. I kind of think that this is really a lot more fun than actually writing MVC code. I tried to make it that way. All right, we got invalid arguments to a service resolver. Why is that? Variables must be a simple object of keys to context lookups. Easy enough. So that means that at least I made the darn thing relatively error conscious. Okay, so this is where the thing gets a little unwieldy. We want to just make things like true constants in the space. But like on server is an inline that is the string true, and that should fix that. No such file or directory as critical CSS. Well, no, hey there. That is untrue. I think that was working before, so I'm going to assume there's either a race condition, which is actually probably quite likely, or there was a change because I saved that. Product shell is there, okay. And it's still doing source queries, okay. Now the upward plugin that I wrote actually does sort of a drop through in its IO, which is customizable, where it looks at Webpack's output system and then input system, etc. But it doesn't seem to be working in this case. All right, still no dice on that, so it's unable. Not sure why.
Yeah,
We'll try
That's making sense to me though. So if you have a GraphQL query, you need to pull it out
Yeah.
somewhere so it's reusable, you make it available, and then you're also sort of updating the templates that are being loaded there and potentially updating the shell depending on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to render where.
Yeah, potentially. What I think is key about it is that this sort of encourages reuse of things like queries, which, I mean, it's really nice and it's good DevX that you can drop them in line, but that's duplication invariably. And so now that this is in a separate file, then we can use it on the client side and the server side just by putting it in here. But yeah, I mean, this is sort of, it's a little bit like declarative and functional in that the ordering doesn't matter. I mean, what happens is that it does a visit kind of through and determines context paths just by going, okay, well, all it cares about is that the thing has a status, a headers, and a body eventually, so it just recurses through. So like, even though we declare a thing called, product result, it's not going to traverse and actually run this call unless the product result is there. So yeah. How did that happen? File resolver. It is a file resolver, and then it tried to do a read file, and the output file system didn't like it that time. I wonder what changed. Anyway, maybe we can get rid of all the debug statements. Rowan, does that seem natural to you, or do you have like significant concerns about it? Because for a while I was coming at this from the top down and saying, look, I know this thing is going to eventually prove itself practically useful, but failed to compile. No wonder.
No, as a first pass and seeing this, it's starting to make sense. And yeah, like I certainly pulling the queries out and making it a bit more if generic is the word I'm looking for, reducing the coupling so that you've got this kind of just declarative layer in the middle does feel like it's more flexible and starts to open up things like what happens when we put Varnish in front of this and so on.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this is that it's pretty limited in scope, and we can expand it, but I deliberately didn't put things like proxying in there or, ETAG resolution, ESI resolution, even though ESIs are kind of a nice fit for this, like they require that there be open endpoints, and that's weird. But yeah, we can put Varnish in front of it. The implementation that I wrote is not focused on speed. It lazy loads at least, but it does cache results based on first of all, an assumption that the file system's immutable, and then it's using Apollo under the hood, so it's going to do cache keys for the GraphQL queries and stuff. So just like the basic sane stuff is going to happen, and then Varnish and CDN sort of push everything to the top. So this thing is not so much performance concerned, although its limited and restricted functionality means that it can't get too slow. Its whole point is, like you said, just to decouple.
And it sounds like as well over time, this gives you a way of kind of sliding your slider all the way from this needs a full server-side render to this can be entirely client-side rendered, depending on what you do with the shell.
Yeah, exactly. And I still think that there's a lot of opportunity to do like transpilation of, a React component that can have blank children into a simple little mustache template, especially because we know that that's just for the first flash of interactivity. And, until it hydrates, it's just showing you branding. But in the meantime, mustache is a great way to just kind of hand hack it. And again, if, a lot of our folks are not going to be doing this sort of single server deployment of days past, so they might just end up standing up a Node.js server and doing the full server-side render if they want to. But I anticipate that the next big thing we'll do is have a Magento module written by some enterprising PHP person, which accepts these configurations, and then you can run your store in PWA mode. Incidentally, this also lets you multicast, or at least it should, but I couldn't connect to Rowan Store for some reason. And you should be able to, import GraphQL. That's what the problem was. And then you should be able to have multiple of these PWAs running locally and all connected to a single Magento store. Because the Magento store now has no link back to the PWA. All we do is log into it with tokens and whatever. And we just, once we have OAuth, then that persists forever. And all that the person who configures the store needs to do is ensure that the integration exists for PWA Studio, which is just a matter of clicking 3 buttons to create a thing. Still busted? Man, what's going on there? All right, doesn't matter.
That's great.
We
That's
are coming
great,
up on
James.
time.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry about that.
No, that's all I had. We're coming up on time, so yeah.
No, this is great. I think that in Rowan, continue to appreciate your feedback as we pull this together. This is, this is where we want to go. Extensibility is really a big theme beyond the, the setup and configuration. So, thank you. No, that's good stuff. So, and so in terms of summary, I think, we've covered everything we intended to. We've got UX, we've got docs, we've got some early workings on navigation, which raised some good questions on interfaces. And then, of course, spent a good part of time in terms of this extensibility story that James has been really diligent about. It really showed some good examples on how this might work. And so all good stuff. And so Sprint 25 in many ways will be a continuation of this. And we've got some good work that we groomed last week as a result of that. And so any questions from the attendees here before we close things out?
No?
All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate all your time and help. And this closes the demo. And have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.